Hi, everyone, and welcome to Adult Bible Studies. I'm Wayne Williams, and I'm glad to be able to share this time with you today. Today's not a great day for me. I'm not feeling quite as well as usual, and I hope that won't show too bad. But nonetheless, I really wanted to share this lesson with you because I feel like it's important as we prepare for Lent to think about all the things that are caught up in Lent and are part of our understanding Jesus' mission and calling and uh, what it means for His to have come and given Himself uh, for our salvation. Last week we looked at Matthew, the 20th chapter, and in that chapter we found Jesus walking along the roadside with His disciples headed towards Jerusalem because in the time frame, this is that week of heading towards Jerusalem. Passover is that final trip to Jerusalem for Jesus. At that time, we saw Jesus' aunt, Salome, Mary's sister, who kind of pulled Jesus off to the side and advocated for her two sons. She said, "You know, my boys, James and John, they've been really good. They've been faithful to you. They've done a lot of good things. And I just hope that you'll consider them. And what I would really like to ask you to consider is that you let one of them sit on your right hand and one on your left hand. And of course, anytime you're at a formal gathering and you're seating people in a formal kind of way, that right hand and left hand seat are significant in the sense of a person's the pecking order, a person's authority, a person's being recognized as a special person. And Jesus turned to her and he told her, "I'm sorry, because that's that's the privilege is not mine to give. God has chosen those who will be a part of this. Understand that this is not just some harem scarum random plan that I'm throwing together as we walk along here, but God has been planning this for centuries, and He has every detail planned out. And those who will sit on the right and sit on the left, and those who will be leaders, and those who will do different things, have already been chosen out in the sense of God giving them the special talents, the special gifts, and opening the doors of opportunity for them to be the people that He needs them to be. And so we saw Jesus ended that conversation by reminding her and her sons that it was not really possible for them to drink of the cup that He was to drink from, because the cup that He was to drink from was one that only He, as the pure uh, Passover lamb, God's Passover lamb, the pure sacrifice for the sins of the world, only He could really drink from that cup. And so they were showing their naiveness and their lack of a depth of theology and understanding. It just hadn't all come together for them yet. This week, we've arrived in Jerusalem, and we're looking at Matthew 21, chapter 21, and we find Jesus there. You know, the temple was broken down in all kinds of little porticos and rooms and meeting areas and garden places, and it was a beautiful place, and people could go and gather and spend time with friends, and in small groups could listen, and kind of like a large church has Sunday school rooms and that sort of thing. And it was in one of those places that Jesus was teaching, and some scribes and Pharisees came by, and they heard Him teaching. And here's where the dialogue begins. When Jesus entered the temple, the chief priests and elders of the people came to Him as He was teaching. They asked, "What kind of authority do you have for doing these things? Who gave you this authority?" Jesus replied, "I have a question for you. If you tell me the answer, I'll tell you what kind of authority I have to do these things. Where did John get his authority to baptize? Did he get it from heaven or from humans?" They argued among themselves. If we say that it's from heaven, He'll say to us, then why didn't you believe Him? And what He means by that is, if you believe that John was truly a prophet and was authenticated by God and authorized by God to perform baptisms and preach the good news of salvation to the people, then why didn't you listen to him? And why didn't you respond? And why weren't you there at those baptisms opportunities and being baptized yourself? But they hadn't done that. Uh, John, where did John get his authority to baptize? He got it from heaven, yes, but they couldn't say that. But we can't say also that he got it from humans. In the church today, we have a well organized church system. We have a hierarchy of roles and that sort of thing, and levels of training and different things you have to go through, all of which is extremely important and very relevant in the sense of uh, elevating someone to a position to where they're in charge of certain things. We have elders who have been to seminary, who have been had pastoral experience, and who are able to perform the sacraments for the church. We have deacons, and those are people who've been to seminary, but maybe they don't have all that experience and stuff yet, and so they're growing, and their ministries are developing, and they're becoming those people that God created them to be. And then we have lay pastors and local lay pastors, and we have lay speakers. A good friend of mine, a very sincere friend of mine, who is very sincere in her faith, is a lay speaker, and she felt the need to be trained if she was going to speak in the church, to be trained in how to organize her presentation, how to have the point that she wanted to make, and how to make it well, how to accentuate and articulate, and all those little fine points. It's because she saw the responsibility to do her best. And that's the same thing the church is saying with these other roles when they authorize by ordination and other means people to serve in certain roles within the church. Certainly, the elders and scribes had not authorized John. He didn't come into the temple and say, I need to fill out a slip for ordination. I want to go out here into the wilderness and preach the good news and baptism from sin. Uh, he just went about his ministry, and the people responded because God authenticated his words, his actions, and put it all together. And the people who had hungry hearts to hear of the love and grace and mercy of God also authenticated that in their response to it. Authority. Authority is, well, it's a slippery slope, isn't it? I can authorize somebody to do something for me, and they can either do it or not do it. They can do a good job or not do a good job. Those kinds of things. Sometimes they try to do it without me authorizing that. One year, not too long ago, some folks that I didn't authorize filed my income taxes for me. They were not authorized to do that. And we had to go through the hullabaloo of refiling our taxes and that sort of thing. But there's authorizations that we give to one another. When our children start driving the car, we give them the authority to drive the car. We may limit that authority. We may say you can only go from here to there. We may even at first even put some greater restrictions on those driving events where we say, I want to ride along with you. Or when you get there, I want you to call me and let me know that you've arrived safely. And when you're getting ready to come back, I want you to call and let me know that you're on your way back. All that has to do with authority, and all that has to do with keeping the authority in reasonable and in a way that it can be used appropriately. These elders and stuff, they weren't really worried about authority. They already assumed they had authority. And yet, were they to stop and really think about where their authority came from, they could go back to Moses and Mount Sinai and the beginning of the priesthood and all those sorts of things. And yet they had taken that ball and ran with it a long way. And yet they never stopped to say, are we really authorized to do all this? Is this really okay for us to do all this? Jesus calls them into account of that. So they couldn't answer him. They couldn't say John was authenticated by God. They couldn't say John was authenticated by the church. He says, then Jesus replied, neither will I tell you what kind of authority I have to do these things. In other words, I don't have to be my own authenticator. Listen to what I say, observe my actions, see how people have responded, listen to your heart, pray about it. This sounds like things that maybe these elders of the Jewish church were not spending a whole lot of time doing. And that pretty much ended the direct confrontation. And yet, right after that, it's not part of today's Sunday school lesson, but I'll just show you how Jesus went from there. He didn't just say, no, I'm not going to answer you either. Just go away, leave me alone. Instead, he went back to teaching, and he began with two parables. One was the parable of the two sons in Matthew 21, beginning with verse 28. It says, what do you think? There was a man who had two sons. He went to the first and said, son, go work today in the vineyard. I will not, he answered. But later he changed his mind and went. Then the father went to the other son and said, I will, sir. But then he didn't go. Which of the two did the father's will? Jesus, in his teaching, is answering their question. If they had eyes to see and ears to hear, and if they were open in faith and humility. Humility is such a wonderful thing in the sense to opening ourselves up to receive the spiritual truths of God's word. And then right after that, he talks about the parable of the tenants, where the farmer makes a vineyard and gets everything ready for it, and he goes away, and he sends his steward to come and collect his part of the proceeds, and they kill his steward, and he sends another steward, and they kill him. Finally, he sends his son, and they kill him. And finally, he comes in and drives out all those who were making use of his vineyard. But nonetheless, it's the point of the story is having authority, using that authority, being people of our word, doing what we say. Lent is a time when we stop and we think about Jesus, and we think about who he was and how he lived and the things he considered important and the things he put the greatest value on. And we see in his example, we see in his words, we see in his results, and we see in several cases, like after his baptism and in his transfiguration on the mountain, when God himself authenticated him. Jesus did indeed have authority to be and do all the things that he was being called upon to do. These elders were missing it. They were so busy trying to justify themselves. Sadly, in our lives and in our churches and in our communities, so many are trying to feel good about themselves by doing things that justify themselves. God says you need to do good things. There's nothing at all wrong with good things. Why are you doing those good things? Have you seen the error of your ways in not doing those good things? Have you said, I'm sorry, that's not the way I should be using my time, who I am, where I am, the resources I have? And you ask God to help you be better at that. And because of that, you're able to do good things that produce fruit, not just good things for the sake of good things. Unfortunately, there's still a lot of these elders and preachers in the uh, synagogue who are going around trying so desperately to justify themselves. Well, I'm going to cut it a little short today. I told you I wasn't feeling real well today. I think I've given you the gist of the story. I hope you will find this an encouraging lesson that will remind you of Lent and of Jesus and of his authority and of his lordship and the need for ourselves to submit to him in all things. Praise be to God. Have a wonderful week.